Hello, it's me, Noir Vortex, and yesterday was pretty weird, really. It's really made me angry, made me sad, just feel hopeless, really, to be honest. Mostly hopeless, mostly, try and find some hope, I guess. I mean, what else? You've got to try and find hope in the darkest moments, otherwise what's the point, really? And if you just, as soon as you start losing the point, it just gets, you just want to stop living at that point, if it comes to that. So, I like living, and, I'm sure you do as well, whoever you are. So yeah, obviously what I'm talking about is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it is an invasion. Any other narrative is pure misinformation and propaganda. There is no way to interpret what's happened here as anything but an invasion by Russia of a sovereign nation. There is no other interpretation of events that makes any coherent sense, to be honest. And Russians, most Russians don't want this. Most ordinary, working class, ordinary Russians, they have no desire to engage in a war against people who are basically their brothers. They're not. These are not even, not that it would even justify it if it was the case, but they're not like distant sort of culturally or anything else. They're the same people in a lot of ways. They are united. They got they have cultural, historical links, everything else. So it's a dark day indeed. I am sad this day has come to pass. Like I sort of knew it was going to happen. To be honest, in a way, that was not actually the primary reason for having that intuition that this was going to come to pass. It wasn't because of something that the intelligence services released, though obviously that sort of clarified my worst fears. It was mostly actually because, like I said, I lived in Russia for 2 years, and I am fairly politically engaged in terms of like theory and history and everything of politics and of the left, but also like how totalitarian societies developed. George Orwell, reading a lot of at the minute, so again, and Orwell is a very authoritative voice on this matter. And I lived in Russia for 2 years, taught there, lived there, and yeah, I'm rambling a bit now, but so there were protests in Moscow yesterday, which is great. I'm glad that the Russian people are having the bravery to stand up to Putin and say, no, we don't want this. Niet, we don't want this Putin. Niet Putin. They don't want it. Why? They don't want this at all. There's a divide in Russian politics. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone in the comments, but from what I understand, being in Russia for a while, mostly it's sort of a divide between boomers and younger people, basically. But that's very oversimplification. Of course, you'd have older people who would be against this war as well, and just see it as pointless. There's many, really. It's not that simple, but generally speaking, like, your sort of older generation are going to be more generally supportive of Putin, whereas the younger ones will probably be more open to new ideas. But that can be generalised by anyone, so that is a generalisation, not really the point of this. There's a lot of things to cover here. One thing actually I'm glad I've not seen too much of, but I've not really been looking out for it, is, and this is something that actually drives me insane. It drives me actually to almost psychotic levels of rage, is when you have so-called left-wingers sort of defending the Putin regime, or anyone in general, like just regurgitating obvious propaganda from the sort of just Russian propaganda, basically, from the Russian state. And I've been reading this books versus Cigarettes by George Orwell. It's a very good and interesting book. I'm not actually fully through it, but I was actually reading this like a few days ago, just before the war started, and I'm just going to read this chapter. It's only 2 or 3 pages. It's all about, basically about how sometimes you do have like people in the intelligentsia who, and this is going back to this is not like now, but using an example of when the USSR was around and you had the totalitarian aspects of the USSR were in action. I mean, this would be around like the Stalinist era, so the worst part of the USSR. And the US, I'm not going to oversimplify the USSR and say it was all evil, it was all bad. You know, like, there were different phases of it, there were different eras of it. The Stalinist era was the dark era of the Soviet Union. It's pretty easy to justify. I mean, the USSR was the hell time of the Soviet Union. But anyway, I digress. I'll read this little extract, and then I'll just talk a bit more about the protests in Moscow, I suppose. It is possible that the Russophile intelligentsia, if they have not succumbed to that... okay, nice. Let me just start from... I'll start from a bit earlier, actually, because it's... need a bit of context, probably. Meanwhile, totalitarianism has not fully triumphed everywhere. Our own society is still, broadly speaking, liberal. To exercise your right of free speech, you have to fight against economic pressure and fight against strong sections of public opinion, but not, as yet, against a secret police force. You can say or print almost anything so long as you are willing to do it in a hole and corner way. But what is sinister, as I said at the beginning of this essay, is that the conscious enemies of liberty are those to whom liberty ought to mean most. The big public do not care about the matter one way or the other. They are not in favour of persecuting the heretic, and they will not exert themselves to defend him. They are at once too sane and too stupid to acquire the totalitarian outlook. The direct, conscious attack on intellectual decency comes from the intellectuals themselves. Is it possible that the Russophile intelligentsia, if they have not succumbed to that particular myth, would have succumbed to another of much the same kind? But at any rate, the Russian myth is here, and the corruption it causes stinks. When one sees highly educated men looking on indifferently at oppression and persecution, one wonders what to despise more, their cynicism or their short-sightedness. Many scientists, for example, and the uncritical admirers of the USSR, they appear to think that the destruction of liberty is of no importance so long as their own line of work is for the moment unaffected. The USSR is a large, rapidly developing country which has acute need of scientific workers and consequently treats them generously, provided that they steer clear of dangerous subjects such as psychology. Scientists are privileged persons. Writers, on the other hand, are viciously persecuted. It is true that literary prostitutes like Ilya Ehrenburg or Alexei Tolstoy are paid huge sums of money, but the only thing which is of any value to the writer as such, his freedom of expression, is taken away from him. Some, at least, of the English scientists who speak so enthusiastically of the opportunities of joy enjoyed by scientists in Russia are capable of understanding this, but their reflection appears to be, writers are persecuted in Russia, so what, I'm not a writer. They do not see that any attack on intellectual liberty and on the concept of objective truth threatens in the long run every department of thought. For the moment, the totalitarian state tolerates the scientist because it needs him. Even in Nazi Germany, scientists other than Jews were relatively well treated, and the German scientific community as a whole offered no resistance to Hitler. At this stage of history, even the most autocratic ruler is forced to take account of physical reality, partly because of the lingering on of liberal habits of war, partly because of the need to prepare for war. So long as physical reality cannot be altogether ignored, so long as 2 and 2 have to make 4 when you are, for example, drawing the blueprint of an aeroplane, the scientist has his function and can even be allowed a measure of liberty. His awakening will come later, when the totalitarian state is firmly established. Meanwhile, if he wants to safeguard the integrity of science, it is his job to develop some kind of solidarity with his literary colleagues and not regard it as a matter of indifference. When writers are silenced or driven to suicide and newspapers systematically falsified. But, however, it may be with the physical science or with music, painting and architecture, it is, as I have tried to show, certain that literature is doomed if liberty of thought perishes. Not only is it doomed in any country which retains a totalitarian structure, but any writer which adopts the totalitarian outlook, who finds excuses for persecution and the falsification of reality, thereby destroys himself as a writer. There is no way out of this. No tirades against individualism in the ivory tower, no pious platitudes to the effect that true individuality is only attained through identification with the community, can get over the fact that a bought mind is a spoiled mind. Unless spontaneity enters at some point or another, literary creation is impossible, and language itself becomes ossified. At some point in the future, if the human mind becomes something totally different from what it is now, we may learn to separate literary creation from intellectual honesty. At present, we know only that the imagination, like certain wild animals, will not breed in captivity. Any writer or journalist who denies that fact, and nearly all the current praise of the Soviet Union contains or implies such a denial, is in effect demanding his own destruction. So, a lot to take in there, I know, but I was reading that actually like a few days before the invasion, and it really struck a chord. I didn't know exactly why at the time, but I think basically it's because it just has that chord of truth, right? I mean, the general idea of it is that I'm a writer. You know, a lot of people watching this will probably be writers, and if you want to be a writer who serves the truth, that is the, you know, a journalist or whatever, then truth is the highest, is the only thing you serve actually. That is your master. You know, if you're, especially for journalists now, if you're a good journalist, the only master you have is the truth, even if that truth hurts. And the truth now of what's happening is this has probably been planned for a long time, I think. I really do think that. I mean, obviously, like, I had that lingering fear in the back of my head, which is why I left Russia. Actually, I was there for 2 years. I was teaching English to teenagers and kids. I had a relationship there. You know, I have deep bonds with Russia. I have deep-rooted bonds there. You know, I really have a family there. To be honest, I mean, I do in many ways. Like, I have a family there. I have different generations. I know I have, you know, older people that I worked with at the camp, my partner for a long time, love one of my loves, and also one of my loves, the main love in my life, really. And I lived there for 2 years. Every single day I'd wake up in our block of flats, you know, the old commie block sort of flats. I'd live a simple life of programming, walking the dog, spending time with my girlfriend, watching films. We spent lockdown together, but I'm not going to go on about that. It's not really about that, right? But I'm just saying I have that sort of connection to Russia of it almost being like my second home, which is very unusual, and especially as a British person, because relationships between our two nations have been strained for a long time. It's just like the aftershocks of the Cold War. There's still this aftershock, but now obviously it's going to get worse. So, obviously, I am appalled at what's going on in Ukraine. I'm absolutely appalled. To the Ukraine people, this is savage. This is terrible. I mean, last I heard, there's 137 confirmed deaths. And every one of those deaths is tragic. It is tragic. Not one person needed to die. Ukrainians didn't want this war. Russians didn't want this war. It's pointless. It is the definition of pointlessness. And I'm sad it's come to this, but here we are, right? So the question is now, I suppose, is, I just implore people of the left, or any political persuasion, honestly, do not I mean, explicitly or otherwise, defend the Putin regime. I've seen some people going on about, oh, we created Putin and we created Putin. All right, okay, but it's just like a whataboutism. I get it. You're doing a sort of analysis of the political history and everything. Oh, that's valid on some level. Of course, I mean, you have to have open discussion and debate of what created these things. But I do sort of think it's academic as well. Like, I'm not advocating for. I don't know what. I mean, I'm still trying to figure this out. Actually, like, what is the best way to respond? I mean, obviously we're imposing sanctions on Russia now, but in a sense, I just sort of feel like that's actually going to hurt ordinary Russians more. So, but then we're in a catch-22 because we can't. I don't think at this point we could send, obviously, UK or US or whatever troops onto the ground. That would just escalate it massively. We can make it worse, like a lot worse. I guess ideally well, I mean, I guess we already are, like, offering like help, aid, and everything else to Ukrainian people just to defend themselves. But also, I think actually something that's probably even is just as vital is we need to support the Russian resistance. Actually, as we need to be in solidarity with them, but we also need to organise to protect their rights as much as we can. And it's hard, right? I mean, we can only do this stuff over the internet mostly, but we need to support these people. They need our support. I mean, like, people I know were arrested yesterday on the Moscow protests. It's just it's the anti-war protests and everything. It's just I'm just distraught about that, really, and I'm worried as well because. But I think if we can somehow convert that into a sort of powerful resistance, then that's a good starting point, and just stand up to Putin. I know a few Russians in London as well, and also, they don't want this, and and also, unfortunately, they're going to probably there will probably be a lot of animosity towards Russians in the UK now, which worries me a lot. It worries me a lot. It really does, because. I'm British. I know that some British people can be just complete ignoramus arseholes. We're a country that brought Brexit upon ourselves, right? A lot of us are just dumbasses, really. I'm not meaning to be provocative, but a lot of people are just really not that clever, and they will just, I'm not saying this is just British people. Any people, we like to lump people together. And anyway, it's a bit of rambling, but that's sort of. What I think, and I'm not happy to be here. I'm not happy to be right, but this is one of those situations where it's like, oh, the worst. I fear the worst, and then it happens, and you're like, now we have to deal with where we are, and we're here.